Hi everyone, I'm Emma.
And I'm Leah, and we both watched season 5 of Stranger Things, and here are some of our thoughts. I really liked this season. I thought that it had some really good character building, but I did think that overall the writers tried to cram a lot into this final season, so some of the storylines ended up feeling a little bit incomplete by the last episode.
It was definitely one of the weaker seasons, if not the weakest season. I actually really enjoyed season 1 through 3. Season 5, the cast was a bit bloated in my opinion. There got to be quite a few characters. And I feel like some existing characters could have been better utilized instead of just adding all these new characters in.
I did really like the way that the ending was framed and how the storyline really wasn't black and white. I thought that was one thing that the show did fairly well, is it really emphasized a lot of the nuance, but I think with so many different nuances in the different character relationships, it definitely struggled to keep a lot of things straight.
A lot of viewers felt a little bit unsatisfied with this ending, especially because it's pretty ambiguous. I saw a lot of internet discourse about it actually. People were wondering if it was Mike's little story at the end was just him making things up or making assumptions versus the actual reality of the situation.
I felt like the very end of the last episode was honestly a pretty good way to tie a lot of the show together, even though some storylines were still missing. But when it came to the central characters, I liked how we kind of got to hear a little bit from all of them.
I saw this clip circulating where Robin's actress Maya Hawke actually, in the middle of a scene, she actually had to sort of pull the Duffer Brothers aside and sort of make a statement because she thought that Robin's behavior in the scene wasn't exactly lining up with her characterization or something like that. And I think that definitely fueled the flames to people's sort of dissatisfaction with the season overall. The Upside Down, I feel I kind of lost some of its scary quality of earlier seasons. It's a little bit strange to me that it changed in such a way, and I feel like it kind of did lose its identity a bit, but I did think the storyline was interesting overall.
Yeah, I think the role that the Upside Down plays in the series really changes throughout. I think one thing that I like this season is how it continued some of the themes from season 1. And I think a lot of things started to make more sense at the end of this season. Obviously, the show begins when Will is taken to the Upside Down, and in the beginning of the show, we really don't know what any of this means or what the Upside Down even really is. Obviously, we see the characters figure it out by the end of this season. But besides the actual reality of figuring out that the Upside Down is a wormhole, I think it's really interesting how that theme of kids being used by the Upside Down and by Vecna really continues throughout the show. And there were definitely a lot of parallels between Holly in this season and Will in season 1, and I really enjoyed watching Holly's character learn to navigate that in kind of similar ways to what we saw with Will earlier on. And then the main cast of characters was at this point older, so they're not really kids anymore, and they're able to serve in more of a mentorship role and see the situation from more of an outside perspective. So I thought that was a really interesting dynamic to watch.
Yeah, I definitely thought Holly was a good parallel as well. And then I also liked what they did with Will's character, especially the scene where he obviously he comes out and then he sort of is able to awaken his powers and fight back. I thought that was a really nice scene, especially since, as you mentioned, in season 1 he was the one who was sort of used and trapped in the Upside Down and suffering, but now he finally is able to reclaim his agency and fight back against these forces.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of gray area that we saw. It's really interesting how we get to see that Will and Elle have a lot of these same powers, and they kind of have to grapple with their identities throughout as well, of how they use these powers.
I think pretty much the entire horror atmosphere is gone from the Upside Down, especially when I mentioned before, it kind of went from being blue and cold to just yellow for some reason. And I remember season 1 had such an 80s horror movie sort of atmosphere that I really enjoyed. That's what pretty much got me into the show in the first place. Yeah, I just feel the show got a little bit scared to kill off main characters, which also just made the stakes not feel quite real.
Building off of that point, I think the military takes a lot of the blow. We see scenes where it looks like hundreds of soldiers are just being killed by a couple monsters. And I think in a way that makes the stakes feel real, because it definitely gives you a sense of perspective of if they fail at this mission, then that could end up being all of Hawkins. But at the same time, there's just way too many coincidences to be realistic at a certain point. Like, somehow always in those scenes, all the main characters are spared. In fact, a lot of the time they're actually spared by the military actively trying to protect them, which again makes the military fit into a really confusing place in this dynamic, because they're sacrificing so many soldiers on behalf of this desire to close the Upside Down. On the other hand, we see Hop go around and kill a bunch of soldiers as well. And I think in all of those fight scenes, I agree with Emma that the stakes don't really feel as real, because we just consistently see all of the main characters being spared. Overall, I did really enjoy season 5, especially more of the emphasis on character building and when the characters finally understand what the Upside Down is. I thought that in some ways the conclusion was really satisfying, giving us information about where all of the characters end up. At the same time, I feel like this last season had the very ambitious job of closing out everything that went before it. And I did feel like the last episode and a half were extremely rushed, where there was a lot that happened all at once, and when it was over, there were still a lot of questions left to be answered. So overall, I thought this was a good season, but it strayed from some of the earlier vibes of the show, which I know some viewers were pretty unhappy about, and ultimately still left a lot unresolved.
I think the show kind of wrote itself into a corner, and it had the really difficult job of, tying all these storylines together, and especially with this extremely large cast now. But I think that ultimately resulted in a season that felt not consistent with the rest of the show entirely. I feel like it was, as you said, kind of straying from what the show used to be, and definitely lost a lot of the original atmosphere that drew me to the show in the first place.
I think my overall rating for season 5 of Stranger Things is a 4.2 out of 5 stars.
My final rating would be a 3 out of 5, just because I feel like it's definitely one of the weaker seasons and doesn't stay true to the show's identity.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.